trickle in. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thanks very much for joining the ROR Community Call today. Fantastic to see all of you here and excited to be here with all of you. So while we wait for a few more folks to join, please head on over to the chat if you haven't done so already and say hello, especially if you're newer to these calls, and feel free to introduce yourself and where you're joining from today and share anything relevant or exciting that you might be working on as it relates to ROR. And I'll just take the opportunity to introduce myself at the same time for those of you I haven't had a chance to meet yet at these calls or elsewhere. My name is Maria Gould. I'm at California Digital Library, where I serve the role of the ROR project lead, and we have a few other members of the ROR core team on the call today who you will hear from in a little bit, and other folks from the three operating organizations behind ROR as well, Crossref and DataSite, in addition to California Digital Library. So again, welcome to all of you. Thanks very much for being here. If you are just joining, we are doing introductions in the chat, so please head on over there and say hello. All right, great to see familiar names and faces as well as some newer ones. And if you're just joining, please take a moment to say hello in chat. So you're welcome to continue saying hello in chat, and while you're doing so, I will share the plan for today's call. We're going to start with a few general announcements about some news and other updates going on with ROR in general, and then I will hand it over to Adam to share some updates on ROR registry curation. After that, we'll hear from Liz about technical updates with ROR, including upcoming changes to the ROR schema. And after that, we'll hear some updates about ROR adoption and integrations, including a featured highlighted integration with folks from FAIRsharing. And depending on where we're at with time, we can do some open Q&A toward the end, and we usually stay on for a little bit after the top of the hour in case anybody wants to chat informally after the call. So this is the plan for today, and feel free to continue saying hello in chat if you've just joined and you haven't had a chance to introduce yourself yet. So starting with a few quick announcements about things going on with ROR. The first thing that I just wanted to mention, because I know we have some newer people on these calls today, or on the call today, is just to provide a little bit of background on what we're doing with these community calls and just make sure that everyone feels welcome. So we've been doing these calls every other month since ROR first started back in early 2019, and they're really an opportunity for all of us to come together and talk about updates and new developments going on with ROR, to talk about items that we really want input and feedback on, and also to hear from all of you about things that you are working on. So we always try to feature an integration or some other kind of demo or work that people are doing to be able to highlight all of the different ways in which people are using ROR. These calls are open to everyone, and we announce them on various channels, and starting this year, trying to promote them a little bit more broadly. So in the past, we've really just included them on a community mailing list, but now we're advertising them on the ROR website on a new events page, and also trying to share the recordings and slides more publicly and more widely for those who are not able to join for the live call. So these calls, again, are just really open to everyone and really meant for everyone. So we invite you to participate and engage in whichever way you feel comfortable, whether that's raising your hand and unmuting to ask a question or share anything on camera or on audio, or just participating in the chat to ask questions or share any updates. So we really do invite and encourage active participation and engagement. Beyond these calls, there are other ways that you can be involved in ROR community activities if you're interested in doing so, and if you are not already involved. So that includes sharing feedback about feature requests and bug reports, which you can do on GitHub. Also, we have various channels for asking questions and sharing information in discussion forums, and those happen on GitHub, on Slack, and a tech support forum. We will drop links to all of these channels in the chat and in our notes doc so that you can access them if you don't already have them. Another way that you can participate in ROR activities is getting involved in supporting our community-based curation model and submitting feedback about additions and changes to the registry, or even getting more involved in helping to review proposed updates and additions to the registry and other kinds of metadata policies and practices that we develop through community input. So registry curation is a really great way for broader community participation and involvement. And then lastly, we are starting to do a series of case studies on the ROR blog featuring different integrations. And this is a great way to share your story about what you're doing with ROR. So you can get in touch with Amanda, who is leading that effort, and can work with you to develop a case study feature for an upcoming blog post. And the next announcement that I would like to share is just an acknowledgement and a note of gratitude to ROR's latest supporters. We, as an initiative, are funded and supported primarily through ROR's 3 operating organizations: California Digital Library, Crossref, and DataCite, but we also have additional supplemental support from community stakeholders around the world. And as of the end of last year, we are also participating in the SCOS infrastructure funding campaign and raising funds for long-term sustainability of ROR. So I just wanted to quickly acknowledge and express my gratitude to the latest organizations that have stepped up to support ROR. We are very, very grateful. And we have a full list of all of the organizations that have previously supported ROR and continue to do so on our website. And the last announcement from me is just a quick note about various events that are coming up that you can read about in more detail and register for in where relevant on the ROR website. We have a new events page, ror.org/events, and Amanda has just dropped the link into the chat. And we're really excited about all of these events that are coming up in the next couple of months. There's these events include some webinars and conferences and working sessions to develop guidance about ROR in repositories. So lots of different things going on. I'm not going to go through each one in detail here, but you can check them out on the events page and register for them if it's relevant to you and something that's of interest. So those are all of the events that all of the announcements that I have to share for today's call. And the next thing I'm going to do is pass the mic over to Adam to share some updates on ROR registry curation.
Thanks, Maria. Can you pull up the next slide? So I just want to take a brief moment to celebrate the fact that we just passed the 1-year anniversary of our independent data releases. We just published our first release back on March 17th of 2022, and our 21st release about 2 weeks ago. So in the past year, we've been able to move from a quarterly release cycle to rolling releases with an average of about 2 releases per month. And this level of publication ensures that the registry remains as current as possible and that we're able to promptly integrate all the valuable feedback we receive from you all, our enthusiastic community of users. In terms of peer numbers, we've again published about 21 data releases. This has been driven by user submissions, as well as various data quality and reconciliation projects. This February was actually our busiest month to date, with us receiving requests to add or modify, I think, over 400 records. In total for the year, we've added almost 2,500 new records and applied over 12,000 updates to 11,000 existing records, or about 10% of the total registry. So that's all for me. Congratulations to everyone who has helped us to reach this milestone by proposing changes, helping curate the registry, or the myriad other ways to be involved with ROR. If you have any questions about registry curation, feel free to reach out to me directly, adam@ror.org or registry@ror.org. Otherwise, I look forward to another year of improving ROR together.
Great. Thanks, Adam. It has really been an incredibly productive and significant year in terms of ROR curation, and huge thanks to Adam for championing and coordinating all of that and making it possible for all of these milestones to be achieved and exceeded. And thanks to our curation board and to all of the community members that have helped to keep this process running smoothly and effectively as well. So next, I will pass it over to Liz to talk about technical updates.
Thanks, Maria. Let me just get my screen sharing set up. All righty. So just a couple of quick technical updates for everyone since the last meeting. So we've been working on a few different projects, and one of them, so by popular demand, we are finally publishing the data dump in CSV format as well as JSON, which is something that lots and lots of people have been asking us for. So starting with the most recent data dump release, which was version 1.21. You will now find two files in the data dump zip. So we have still the JSON file, but you will also see a ROR data CSV file in there. So some important notes for those who are parsing the JSON file. Just know if you grab the data download, there will now be two files in there instead of just one. And if you're interested in using the CSV file, we have taken as many fields as we could jam into that CSV, but flattened some of the nested fields, for example, relationships and labels. Those things are grouped together by the relationship type. So you'll see a field that has its relationships, and then a list of the IDs that are a parent, have a parent relationship or a child relationship, and then similarly in labels, you'll see them grouped by the language of the labels. So the structure is slightly different from the JSON, just because it's not JSON, it's CSV. But hopefully that will be helpful for quite a few folks. The other big thing we've been working on for many months, as you may know if you've been following along, is the next iteration of the ROR schema. So a few months ago, back in December, we released a draft schema document for public comment. And if you remember, if you were around for those meetings, a little bit of background on this is that we are continuing to evolve since we split from Grid. We have some needs that we've heard of from the community, as well as internal needs that we'd like to make some changes to the schema to serve. And so that is the reason that we are putting together a new version. The areas that we are looking at changes to are location information, name information, external identifiers, web domains of various kinds, including things that are currently in links, IP addresses, email addresses, and Wikipedia URLs, as well as adding administrative information. So we did circulate that draft, the initial draft proposal oops, sorry, the dates on here are not quite correct. We circulated that to from December to mid-February. I have compiled an anonymized document that summarizes the feedback from that process. So you can have a look at that if you want. The link is in the final draft document as well. And we have now put together a revised semi-final draft document of this schema proposal. We held an in-depth, oh, I'm sorry, this is the link that we want to be looking at. We held an in-depth call about the changes in this document and the differences between the initial proposal and the final draft proposal on March 15th. So I'm not going to go through and review everything that's in this document in detail, but I do have the link to the slides from that meeting that you can have a look at that give an overview of the differences between the initial draft and the final draft. But you'll see on the left-hand side, this is organized by the sections of information, so names, location, web domain information. And what we're asking is for folks who are interested to take a look and add any additional input you have as comments here by April 7th. And what we're looking at here is basically input on the implementation of the changes in each section. We're not looking to completely rework this document or the changes because it has been through a fairly lengthy initial comment period. There was a lot of discussion. So we're more so looking for feedback on the implementation of those changes. You'll see in each of the sections, things that are highlighted in yellow are basically discussing the changes from the initial draft. So those are some things to focus on. And we have in each section the example JSON metadata for the current and the proposed version. So the proposed version is in orange. And if there's a change from the initial draft, you'll see the initial draft proposal here in yellow. So we're just trying to make it easy to differentiate those three versions. In particular, so we do have a couple of areas where we are looking to add some controlled lists for a few metadata items, name types and link types. There is in this document a section at the end that is specifically about proposed controlled lists for new fields. That's an area we are particularly looking for feedback on, and this is new in this revised document. So if you're interested, please have a look at the document and add your comments by April 7th. And with that, I will hand it back for adoption updates. And I think given the time, we can take some questions at the end because we want to make sure we have time to get through the adoption updates and case study.
Great. Thank you, Liz. Now over to you, Amanda.
Thank you. Yeah, so just a few adoption updates. Next slide. We've had several new integrations since the annual ROR Community Call in late January, early February, which many of you might have attended. Just going out, in fact, this morning is an announcement that Europe PMC has incorporated ROR IDs into its grant finder. Europe PMC has done a lot of other ROR integrations, and we have Michael Parkin here on the call, who is the able representative of Europe PMC. So you can read all about that integration in, I think even InfoDocket has just shared it, and there's a post on the ROR blog and so on. So that's a terrific integration. We're very happy about that. Science Open is a platform. It's one of the systems that supports Africa Archive. Has integrated ROR. They've announced that, I believe, back in February. Liberate Science, which is an initiative that some of you may be familiar with, actually live streamed their integration of ROR in 4 separate live YouTube streams. So Chris Hartdrink, who is the CEO of that enterprise, recorded himself exploring the ROR documentation and figuring out how ROR works and incorporating it into the metadata schema and the database for their product. So lots of interesting things to see there. So this is not the Octopus platform. Some of you may be familiar with this. Is sort of a new platform that's sponsored by GIST, and in fact, they're working quite closely with Liberate Science. And there was an article in Nature recently about that partnership. Essentially, what they're doing is kind of disaggregating the research enterprise so that it's named Octopus because they've defined sort of 8 phases of research, such as sharing data, and you share everything in those different kinds of pieces rather than in just one article with a lot of figures and so on. So this is not a new integration, but sometimes it can be hard for us to know when systems have integrated ROR. So we did sort of realize quite recently that they are recommending, for instance, that authors include ROR IDs for acknowledging funding. Janeway has not completed a ROR integration, but they did announce that they are planning on doing it. And we've got a link on this slide here to the roadmap where they are looking at the various phases for their ROR integration. Radar is a research data repository system in Germany. They recently announced a ROR integration. I think we have a representative here of Peru CRIS, which is a national CRIS system for Peru. They launched quite recently with integrated ROR IDs. So you can perhaps ask Abel about that. And then we did announce this at the annual meeting, but I thought I would remind everyone that the service provider Scholastica has integrated ROR into all 3 of its products. And we are, in fact, we have done a case study with them that should be published probably this week or early next week by the latest. So yeah, they've got a great announcement about that, and we'll have an even more in-depth study of that. Okay, next slide. I thought I would start showing these at our community calls. We're always looking at trying to track ROR's impact, and one of the major ways that we want to do that is by seeing who is sending ROR IDs in DOI metadata to both Crossref and DataCite. So Crossref, as probably most of you know, only began supporting ROR IDs in its metadata schema at the beginning of 2022. So it's been now about 1.25 years. And you can see there the slow but steady rise in ROR IDs in Crossref DOIs. That big spike you see there in August 1st or 2nd, 2022 is in fact due to Europe PMC, who is registering DOIs on behalf of grants for the Wellcome Foundation. So yes, slow but steady uprise. Next slide. So DataCite, I matched the timescales for these 2 slides because it bothered me that they weren't in sync. So DataCite actually adopted ROR IDs much earlier. They've been supporting them since 2019. But for this slide, that goes back to the beginning of January. The numbers are a bit fuzzy, but even they are showing quite an increase. They had something like 386,000 at the beginning of 2022, and they're now at 578,000 plus. So people continuing to send those ROR IDs to the DOI registrars. And now we are going to hear from a featured integrator. Ramon Granel is here from FAIRsharing to tell you all about their integration of ROR. And we have also published a case study with them on the ROR blog. So if you do find some things of interest in this presentation, you can always go and read that as well. Ramon?
Hiya, thank you very much, Amanda, Maria, for taking me here. I will go to present the integration of ROR inside the FAIRsharing platform. Can you pass the next slide, please? Hiya. This is a group of people. We are based on the University of Oxford, Department of Engineering Science. And then here is the link to the case of study that Amanda just commented. And then in the next slide, I will explain what is FAIRsharing.org. Next slide, please. Okay, FAIRsharing is an informative educational resource that contains metadata about databases, policies, and standards. It means, and when I talk about the metadata, is that we don't have the data that is inside the database. We have information about the scientific databases. And what is more important is that we connected the three resources. We connected the policy with databases, the databases with standards, and the standard with policies. And then all the data is curated. And then inside this metadata is also the organizations that at the point we are going to use ROR. For the reason we have this kind of integration. Obviously, this is also based in the FAIR principles. I don't know if everybody knows what are the FAIR principles in science, but basically is to have the science and the data, scientific data, findable, indexable, accessible, and reusable. Okay, thank you very much. Next slide, Maria. Okay, this is some numbers about FAIRsharing. We contain at the moment these 3,800 records that record that, for instance, around 2,000 databases. But what is more important for us is not so much the quantity, it's more the quality, because all the data in FAIRsharing is manually curated by almost professional curators. And then we check that we put the access point of the databases, if they have an API, where is the API, where are the organizations collaborating, and we have quite curated information about databases. For instance, before I think that Amanda commented about Radar. Radar is one of the records we have in FAIRsharing integrated. And here show some numbers of the, we have also disciplines and the topics and the different information about the resources. And then, for instance, we have the databases are following this and this standard, that is this kind of connection that is not easy to follow. Because later you want to find, I'm looking for a genetic database following this standard. You are able to use the resource to find this kind of database. Next slide, please. Okay, then we have around 3,500 organizations, and then at some point this without. Let's try to use the ROR database to match our organizations. And then here the organizations are related to both to records and to users, because we have also the users of that created our records. And here you can see an example of one of the organizations we have in FAIRsharing.org. And then this organization, in this case, is the National Cancer Institute from the National Institute of Health. And you can see we have the homepage, the name, the type, and the children and father. And then at the bottom, you can see we have the ROR link. This is the thing, the integration we have been doing. And then on the right, you can see the records related in our database to these organizations. All the records on the right are or maintained or funded, or they have some kind of relationship with this organization. Next slide, please. Okay, and then for doing this mapping, what we did is doing a text mapping between the name of our organizations and the name that appears in ROR. And first name and later the URL. Here you can see an example, and then what we're computing is the edit distance. Edit distance is only the difference in characters. The minimum number of substitutions, deletion and additions of characters. And then in this case, you can see we have this blue database of the University of Ghent of Belgium, and then you can see the differences that is taken from 3 different URLs. And you can see that in this case, there are like this one, the distance 1, distance 3, and distance 4. And you can see in this case, the minimum distance is not the correct one with the ROR matching. And this is step 2, because from the 3 closest links possible matching between our organizations and their organizations, the curators check what was the real matching. And later, finally, with some Ruby script, this matching of the ROR URL was integrated in our database. The results, it was a 48%, almost 50% of our organizations have nowadays a ROR link. And why only a 50% of our organizations? Because basically we have different concepts of organization that ROR has. For instance, we have a kind of a small group in a university that ROR doesn't consider this like an organization. Or we have, for instance, a consortium that is a project consortium that is only exists for a number of years and is not an organization for ROR. And it's only thing because we have different idea what an organization is. And for reason there is only a 50% of matching. During this process, we also find that we have repeated organizations, we have organizations with not proper names and URLs, and we updated our database thanks to the information that you can find in ROR. And also we perform this, we repeat periodically every 6 months this kind of matching to find new matches of our new organizations with ROR organizations, because both our database and ROR is constantly updating, and then we want to find new matches. Next slide, please. And then what we do is when someone is created a new record, instead of creating the organization, can import automatically the organization automatically using the API of ROR. And it was a great advance because then you don't need to do the mapping later, a posteriori later. You can do automatically get information from ROR, and it saves times to the person creating this and saves times to ours. And as the ROR information is quite updated and quite accurate, we obtain this information automatically from ROR. And this is automatically performed using the API. And then the user, when using FAIRsharing, creating this organization, it puts the name, and then it gives you the closest matches, and then the user can select the organization. Sometimes it's possible that the user doesn't find the organization, and it keeps having the possibility to create the organization manually, not using the ROR. But this possibility exists. It's always, and it's very useful. Thank you very much. Next slide. And that's all. And this is the way that we integrated ROR in FAIRsharing. You have any doubt or whatever? I think Amanda has commented we have this kind of blog in ROR, and we have also in our blog, we have put also some information about how we integrated this. And here you can see all the team and the stakeholders of FAIRsharing. Thank you very much for giving the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Ramon. I will mention that the case study on the ROR blog is actually an interview with Allison Lister, who couldn't be here today. You can see her featured on this slide, the content and community coordinator. And that was back in December. And as I recall, Ramon was actually at a holiday party at the time, yes, and so was not able to join the interview. So I've been very glad you could join us today, Ramon.
Thank you very much. And one thing that you have included in the chat, that one of the scripts I was using to do the matching between our organizations and the organization of ROR using text files is already in the GitHub repository that the people can use. It's a Python script. It's not really rocket science. It's based on edit distance, and it's quite easily based on the distance between the name and the URLs. You can use it whenever you like. Thank you very much, Amanda.
Appreciate that. Back to you, Maria.
Great. Thank you, Ramon. It was great to see. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Ramon before we open up the discussion to other topics? I guess I'll just maybe ask one quick question, Ramon, which is the work done, or is there more, is there more work that you're seeking to do in the future that involves ROR in some way, or, are there any next steps ahead, or things are good to go for right now?
Well, it means we constantly do an update every 6 months. It means, and then and it helps also to kind of doing a cleaning process of our organization database, because as we don't have control how the people create organization, sometimes some organizations repeated are added, but we have some checks that the name is completely the same, but if someone changed some characters or putting different language, for instance, we don't have this kind of check-ins. And if there is a matching of the ROR, we detected that it's a kind of repeated organization. But and at the moment we're using the children and the parent organizations, and then I know there is another relationship between organizations in ROR. I think it's called sibling, or maybe we can use
It's related, yeah. It's essentially sibling, yeah.
Yeah, we can use this relationship maybe in the future, or using, for instance, if you increase the alternative names, because we have some alternative names, but we can include more, or it means. Yeah, but it's always a possibility to use new features and new fields that they are in ROR database to have in our database.
Great, thank you for walking us through that. Any other questions or comments for Ramon? Welcome to put in them in chat or raise your hand.
Adam, are you? I'm not hearing you.
Can you hear me now? Okay, sorry, my microphone went funny. I was just going to say that what Ramon was just describing is a great example of how the community curation process feeds into actual integrations, because his local data is being cleaned up as the data is being improved in ROR. So sometimes we think that we're doing a lot of this work in the abstract, kind of changing or improving records, but it really does filter out to everybody who's using the service. So the more you're involved with that, the more you give feedback, the more work I have to publish and update records. Really, it does improve the service for everyone. So I just want to throw that comment in there.
Thank you, Adam.
Great, thanks. All right, so we've just gone through a lot of different information about things that are going on with ROR these days. We talked about the 1-year milestone of achieving independent management and curation of the registry. We also heard from Liz about new developments on the technical front, both with the CSV data file and with the upcoming schema changes. And Amanda went through all of the exciting things going on with the latest integrations, including FAIRsharing. So now this is an opportunity for anyone here to ask questions or to share comments about any of the information that we just shared, or if there's something else on your mind that you want to ask about, that is also fine. The floor is yours. So are there any questions or comments or announcements that anyone would like to share today about any of the topics or about anything else that we haven't covered? Let's see, looks like somebody has a hand raised. Yes, Donos?
Yeah, yes, hi there. Oh, hold on. I don't know if you can see me, but anyway, yeah, so thanks a lot. That was very informative around ROR. There was one thing that I had in mind, and I was wondering, it might be in the documentation, but all over the place. I was wondering if we could have a description of the journey of an entry through the ROR database. So an entry is coming in, it is called new or newly joined or something like this. It goes through its journey, being edited and so on, and then gets withdrawn. At each individual stage, the attributes of that entry must conform to specific constraints. So one of those I came up recently. For example, if an organization can only have relationships to active organizations or withdrawn organizations. So the motivation for what I'm looking for here is to be clear on what when you say, for example, oh, this entry is being withdrawn, or this entry should be inactive, or this entry just made it into the database. Because with the passage of time, as it seems, the database will be accumulating more and more and more inactive entries. And so I was wondering, well, okay, so at length of time, what are we looking at, a JSON or CSV or whatever you want to call it, which mostly has inactive entries? Do they come off the file at some point? And this is, so the motivating factor behind these questions, can we have a definite delineation or a definite description of the stages of life within the of an entry within the ROR database?
Thanks. Adam, Liz, do you want to take this?
Yeah, so my first broader comment was the files will probably never get peeled off because we're a persistent identifier service. So there will always be a reference to a ROR ID once it's created. In terms of, I don't know that we have a kind of a full documentation or piece of kind of blog post or anything like that that describes, that kind of transit, although that's certainly something that we could look at putting together. But most of that is detailed in our ROR updates GitHub repository that I linked at the beginning of the call, but if someone can pull it out and throw it in the chat, I'd appreciate that. Yeah, but essentially what happens is that when requests are made either through our Google form or over email or in the GitHub repository itself, they get populated as issues. The issues then go through a curation process initially by me and then by our other curators. From there, they run through a kind of series of validation and data improvement things to kind of flesh out the kind of total scope of what should be included in the record. And from there, they get published. There is, as part of the kind of open, transparent curation process, there is a description of everything that we're doing in the record. So for example, in your case where a status of a record is changing, we comment to the effect of, yes, this organization is identified as closed in 2013 or something to that effect. So we do kind of try and be as transparent as possible about why we're making certain changes to records or why we're adding fields. So for any given ROR ID, you should be able to search in the ROR updates repository and find a corresponding issue that kind of describes the kind of full scope of changes. Sometimes we do have bulk changes that kind of catch up a bunch of records, which would be described as a project issue, but we do also try to include the metadata files for those in those project issues such that you can kind of parse those out. Yeah,
all right, Adam, I think I'm
Sure.
I'm a bit more shallow than what you were
Sure.
describing. So what I was thinking is when you see an entry into the JSON file, let's say, and it has an inactive characterization. So the status is inactive, then this means something for then this means, well, there are constraints on what its values might be and what its links to other entities might be and so on. So until this entry has become inactive, what is the journey that it is going through? So it comes in as active, as newly created, as as something. Then the constraints at that stage should be 1, 2, 3. Then it goes on, and another use case for this could be, or another reason for trying to describe this would be when you get a new ROR file in. Imagine that you do something like a semantic diff between the two files, and now you want to decide which entries are the new ones, which ones do you update, and which ones do you have to create anew into the database, which ones do you have to delete, and that is if you're doing deletion, and that is so this is an aid to help you in deciding what should you do with a specific entry in this database.
Yeah, so that's kind of a local decision about how you want to kind of handle the ingest of the database. I will say that as part of our schema version 2, we're looking at adding specific fields to kind of address these kind of changes specifically created in the last modified dates, such that you should be able to filter on those. So if you're thinking long-term about how to handle those kind of diffs and ingestion, I would say that focus on what we're going to do in schema version 2 for next year. But generally speaking, again, an organization being made inactive doesn't necessarily mean that the reference should be removed depending on the indexing of historic data in your kind of organizational databases. And indeed, in case sometimes we get requests to add new inactive records as part of a reconciliation process, you know, to various integrations, or to fully kind of follow the trail of relationships or successions or those kind of things. So there's not really one set of decisions that you can make based on changes in the data. Those are kind of specific to your local context. The only exception to that is probably our withdrawn records. So occasionally, because we've inherited this data source from Grid, or, you know, I don't think we've withdrawn any records that we create. Well, maybe one or two. We identify records that were created in error or were duplicate records, and we essentially push them, you know, to either pull them out of the registry by saying, you know, this is withdrawn totally, or we say this is withdrawn and you should use this record instead, identified with a successor relationship. So in terms of kind of the bulk things that you really need to pay attention to, the withdrawn use case is probably the only, you know, kind of primary one. For inactive, it's really kind of dependent on how you're using ROR, you know, locally.
All right, that's great. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think Adam has mentioned this, but yeah, it's part of what you're trying to do is just identify which are the new records in the ROR data set. Because we definitely have heard people say, because that's a separate issue with inactive records, because we could add new inactive records, because inactive is really about the organization. This organization is no longer doing work.
ROR has its own objectives, and I'm using it for specific objectives, or you know, for a specific use case. And in my case, for example, I'm interested in the active records. But from version to version, I need to maybe update, or if an active has become inactive, do I edit it? Do I withdraw it completely? And then when you start afresh, all these questions do not exist. But when you have built up a few thousand entries, then the step from one version to the next can be destructive, which is not very dramatic, but I mean, you don't want to wait to you know, you don't want to have, sometimes you don't want to have differences on a stable data set, for example, but you would like to have all these updates. So a side question to what Adam was talking about is, is the intention for ROR to become a long-term archive of the history of an organization? Because I think even now you can track a few organizations, maybe from birth to maturity to withdrawal, for example. I mean, that would be interesting from some respects, but I'm just saying this is going to be a huge file and a lot of maybe constraints in there, and you know, not easy to tell which entries you should be keeping and which entries you should be throwing away.
Right.
Yeah, so this did come up when we were looking at the proposal about how to handle organization status, and our decision at that time was that, I mean, because of the way that ROR is curated basically through requests that come into us, it's not really possible for ROR to have complete information about an organization's history, at least not with any authority, because we aren't you know, actively going and looking at each organization and reviewing its history and updating our file. We're acting based on information that the community brings to us. So we might get information at, you know, some different time than a change actually took place. So we're not looking to be an authoritative history tracking service for organizations, although I agree that that information will, you know, kind of de facto appear in the history of ROR records. I think there are some, you know, as we look at the evolution of the ROR schema in the future, an area of interest that people have is more detailed provenance and history information. In this round in schema version 2.0, we're just focusing on created and last modified dates, just to start things going with administrative information, because the grid schema that we inherited didn't have any administrative information, and beyond that, we will probably look at how can we balance having some useful amount of provenance and history information versus going down a slippery slope of being really focused on that kind of history and provenance data to the exclusion of other things that we want to be focused on.
Great. Okay. Well, that's it from me. And also, hi, Lisa and Amanda. We've spoken, in other
Yes.
media. I'm putting a face to the account names right now. Thank you.
Thanks for your
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, I do want to point out, so obviously we don't have those created and last modified dates yet, but if you're really interested in what has changed in a given release, we do include at least what was added and what was updated in terms of just the record IDs and names in the release notes. So I'm just pasting the link to the release notes. It's a little awkward to parse in an automated way, but that information is there in the release notes for now for those who are looking for a workaround to get the only what was added or only what was updated.
Yep.
Hello, you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, how you doing? I just wanted to somewhat reiterate a thought I had on the last meeting, the schema meeting. It's probably more apropos here. Just that in addition to the inactive organizations, kind of related to that is the do you call them synonyms, aliases? I'm not sure the name you guys use for the also known as kind of
Aliases
subset
is
aliases.
the current term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For submission use cases, it would be a huge help if the aliases could be treated equal to the name of record for a submitting author when they're looking for their affiliation or how they characterize their affiliation, whether it's, their native language or whatnot. They might always know their affiliation as one of your aliases. And so they're not looking for the parent name when they're submitting their article. So it might be an edge case, it might not be, I'm not sure, but it would be a huge help for us because we have a lot of authors who are not matching the ROR name based on just the name of record or the parent, if you will. No, not the parent, because you have a hierarchy, excuse me. So just the name of record. So what happens is that I'll go in, I'll manually review it. I'll see that they've manually typed in an alias, but they didn't get a match for that reason. So it's kind of like maybe a wider funnel at the top. And certainly this is not for the use case of duration or history or anything like that. It's purely for submitting authors, ease of use, and to kind of tighten up our matching efforts after submission is complete. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll say if when integrations are built using the query parameter search, actually all those names are rolled up into one names field that doesn't differentiate any sort of hierarchy at all. So for the purposes of making the search a little bit quicker and more responsive, we just take everything that's a name for all the fields and smush it into one search document. So that actually is the case right now. I would say if the aliases aren't showing up in a search specifically using our query parameter search, it's more likely a case that the alias is missing from the ROR record, that it's more a data issue than a search functionality issue. And in that case, we want to know what the alias, what the name variations are that are not matching. So that would be a case for a curation request.
Okay, so maybe I'll speak with how, internally to how the API was configured and go from there. But thank you for that information.
Thanks for your question, Chris. So we're coming up on the top of the hour. Are there any other questions or comments or anything that anybody wanted to share? All right, so we will hang out for a few minutes in case anyone has anything else they want to chat with us about, but I'll just take this opportunity to thank all of you for joining today. Thanks everyone for listening, for sharing your updates, asking questions. Thanks especially to Ramon and the FAIRsharing team for presenting their integration today. And we will schedule another one of these community calls in a couple of months. I think we're aiming at May 25th, and we will publicize that on the ROR events webpage and other channels. So
The registration for that is already live. So you can
Awesome.
you can register for the May call right now if you like.
Excellent. We will look forward to seeing all of you there and any other events in the interim. So have a wonderful day.